So thank you everyone for coming today, and a special thanks to Professor John Mason as well as Danielle Waddell, our student representative. Thanks everyone for your interest in the Master of Clinical Psychology post-registration course at the Cairnmillar Institute. My name is Mung. I'm the Academic Registrar and Student Services Manager here at Cairnmillar. And we're really excited that this has been such a high interest course. So throughout today, or this evening rather, you'll get a chance to hear from both John, the course coordinator, as well as Danielle, a bit more about what makes the course unique and why you might want to consider studying it. We'll have an opportunity to go through some of the questions that each of you raised as well when you registered your interest for attending this session. And there'll be an opportunity as well at the end to go through any additional questions that are raised throughout today's session. So for all of our attendees, you do have a Q&A feed, which you can continue putting any questions into, but we'll make sure to address them as best we can. And there'll be opportunities to reach out for further contact after today's session. So I just wanted to start with an acknowledgement of country. Again, Cairnmillar is founded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their deep, enduring connection to land, waters, and community. We acknowledge the richness and value of their accumulated cultural knowledge spanning vast expanses of time, and extend this respect to all Indigenous peoples of this continent and adjacent lands, as well as to any First Nations people present or who may come across the material below. So thanks, folks, again for attending. And I just wanted to get us started with a bit of a snapshot of Cairnmillar. So for those of you who are here, you've probably done a little bit of your own research, but what you've probably found out is that Cairnmillar Institute is a small specialised school located in Hawthorn East, and we've been pioneering psychology and counselling education since the early 60s. So we very much pride ourselves on being specialists in the field, and as such, students do really get an opportunity to learn from experts and practitioners, as well as engage in high quality facilities and learning environments because of our focus on mental health. There are a number of different flexible study options as well, with students being able to enroll online or on campus, as well as full and part-time. And we also really commit ourselves to providing tailored support services, whether that's for your studies, your research, as well as just the general student experience. We have a number of different opportunities for professional development and lifelong learning as well, whether that's through micro-credentials, short courses, or single subjects. And we're also a not-for-profit, so donations and tuition fees are funded back into the community, whether that's through clinical practice, research, or otherwise. So we very much pride ourselves on being kind of comprehensively advocates for mental health, whether that's through our education, our research, or our practice. And we're looking forward to sharing a little bit more about specifically the post-registration course with you today. So I'll pass it to John, who, as I mentioned earlier, is our course coordinator, and he'll start giving you a bit more information about what makes this course unique and why you might want to consider it.
Thanks, Mum. Welcome, everybody. As Mung said, please feel free to follow up anything that myself or Danielle talk about with questions in the Q&A. This is a good opportunity to get as many of the questions answered as possible. A lot of the things that have come through as advanced questions, I think we're going to cover in the slides, but anything we don't, we can pick up afterwards. So one of the things that is unique about this course is 100% online. So there are more and more level 4, so standalone bridging programs, APAC level 4 programs for people that have general registration as psychologists to get onto the endorsement pathway for clinical psychology. Most of the bridging programs that are out there, I think all but one, are for clinical psychology, but we're one of the very few, if not the only one, that is 100% online. Mostly they are have a face-to-face component or are largely face-to-face. And even if the component's only an intensive, if you are coming from the other side of the country, that can be problematic. All of our lecturers are practitioners, all of our supervisors are practitioners, so all of our lecturers and all of the course staff, in fact, are board approved, clinically endorsed psychologists. And we are, by some margin, the largest course of its kind in Australia. So we had an intake last year of 85. and this year it will be similar, if not slightly more. And the next largest intake for a course like this, a level 4 standalone bridging program, would be sort of in the high 20s. So we've got a lot of experience of working with large cohorts of students. We do only offer the course part-time. Danielle will probably talk a bit more about that. But that still we're still able to provide flexibility within that. So we have a sort of recommended structure for people to get through it in a 2-year sequence. But a lot of people do stick to that, but some do need to go slower. People have changes of circumstances, people fall pregnant, people get promotions, things change. And so we are able to offer flexibility within that part-time framework. And of course, the thing about the online format is it gives you a lot of flexibility with the study that you are doing as well. So we have a mixture of recorded and sort of synchronous lectures, and particularly with the recorded ones, for most units, you would be able to do that pretty much at your own pace. And you would find many weeks of the lectures uploaded in advance. Placements are always the source of questions. Danielle is doing her second placement at the moment, be able to talk about her experience of doing placements. We do what we can to be as flexible as possible with placements within the sort of confines of them needing to provide you with the opportunity for clinical psychology practice and a new learning environment. The idea is that people source their own placements. So we have a lot of experience with trying this in different ways, and by far and away, the most successful way we found of doing it is students who come into the course already having their own deep networks usually are able to do a much better job of sourcing a placement for themselves than we are for them. We do allow people to do placements in their workplace, as long as it's appropriate and as long as the placement can be structured to give the opportunity for a new experience, a new clinical experience. And as long as that's sort of augmented with another placement that isn't in your workplace. So generally, we only allow one placement in the workplace. And then we provide all the supervision. So we have a mixture of individual and group supervision that we organise for you. And in the first placement, that tends to be both individual and group throughout the placement each week. And by the time you get to second placement, group and individual placement alternate each week, because you need a bit less supervision by the time you get into your second placement. I'll go to the next slide, Mum. So as most of you will have figured out way before getting to this point, the course is to put people back onto into the registrar pathway. So in order to get to the sort of final point of being a clinical psychologist, what people need to do is complete the bridging program, complete the course like this, and then do the used to be 2-year, now 88-week registrar program. So you do that once you've completed the course. To get into the course, what's required is to be a generally registered psychologist, is the bottom line at the moment. And that can either be generally registered with no conditions on your registration and having practiced for a year, or generally registered and having completed a level 3 qualification, so the MPP effectively. So if you went through the 4+2 route, then you need to have been practicing for a year before you can commence. If you went through the 5+1 route, then you don't. You just need to be generally registered. And so once you've sort of figured out that you are eligible, then we ask you can go onto the website. You'll see that there's a pretty brief application form with 3 questions in it, and you submit that along with a CV. The referees, we do need 2 referees, and we do need 2 referees from everybody, and they've got to come through the referee system that all postgraduate courses use in Australia, postgraduate accredited psychology programs, that is. And that system is a bit clunky, and it is worth you following up with your referees to check that they have submitted their referee report for you, so that we're not trying to chase you to find out why we can't find your referees on the system, or why we can only find one referee on the system, for example. We are this year doing things a bit differently. So we're processing applications as we go. And we're doing that in about 3 slices, if you like. But really the main thing for you to know is if you put in your application, then we will process it, and you will hear from us if you are shortlisted relatively quickly. And if you're not shortlisted straight away, then we'll tell you that we've waitlisted you. And then you'll be enrolled in a course that gives you the opportunity to take a brief 90-minute multiple choice exam, and also to submit a video. And the video is in lieu of an interview. So we don't use interviews anymore as part of our selection. And the exam, unfortunately, is there as part of our APAC requirements, so that we're able to demonstrate that everybody's met all the requirements from level 3 in order to do a level 4 program. So there are no interviews, but there is a video that people submit. And we take care of all of that for you through one of our learning management systems, Moodle, and it's all pretty straightforward. The exam really isn't anything much to worry about, and there's plenty of information on the Moodle site about how to go about studying for the exam, what areas to cover. There's example exam questions and sort of examples to give you a sense of the level of difficulty of the questions as well. We might move to the next slide. And then once the course commences, so we have a pretty conventional semester structure here at Cairnmillar. We don't take mid-year enrolments, so everybody that starts in February. So sorry, that should have been updated to 2025. So semester 1 2025 commences in late February, and assuming the kind of conventional part-time pathway, then the way it works is 2 coursework units in the first semester, 2 coursework units in the second semester, and then that's the first year done. And then in the second year, the first semester has the first placement alongside a research unit, and that's duplicated in the second semester. The research units don't involve kind of full empirical investigation. It's really an extended case report. So it's a 6,000-word literature review and case report, which is spans 2 semesters in order to kind of split the workload really, and mean that people aren't trying to get their head around starting placement and do a load of coursework type work at the same time. So the placements and research units all sit in the second year, and the coursework all sits in the first year. And you can see from this the coursework would have a fairly familiar look and feel to it. This is what's there at the moment. We are talking about potentially changing some of the units that are included, potentially by including a third unit in the second semester of the first year as an elective, and people would choose 2 of 3 rather than just being locked into the 2 that we've got. But at the moment, we have a fairly gentle start with a sort of evidence-based practice unit and the adult psychopathology unit. And then in the second semester, the clinical assessment, so sort of advanced neuropsychological assessment and child psychopathology unit. And people do generally find the second semester slightly more challenging than the first semester. But we've sort of done that fairly deliberately in order to give people that are returning to study after a long time some opportunity to ease themselves into postgraduate psychological study again, really, by making the first semester slightly more feel slightly more familiar to people. Danielle, should I cover my ears for this bit, or should I
No, I am going to change. I'm going to change one thing you just said though. Only because when you mentioned that second semester was probably more difficult, I think it also depends on what experience you've got as well. So I guess for me, I found with my child and youth experience, second semester way easier than learning about adults in semester one.
Yeah.
That's a personal take. I am in, for I guess anyone to know, I'm in my semester 2 for second year. So in my placement B, research project B. And I know a lot of questions are usually around what's the workload like? How do you handle that? And if this is any example, so I was asked to keep a light conversation from the student perspective, and I've ended up with a PowerPoint. So obviously for me, I need a lot of structure and I use a little bit of OCD traits to deal with stress. But I guess different course highlights that have come up for me is it does in semester 1 and semester 2 of the first year, it covers every component. So anything that you might have covered during uni or components that you haven't maybe had experience in your practice is covered in first year. So you do end up getting quite a variety of knowledge bases. The tutorials that are offered for each subject as well are a great opportunity because they're the ones where you get to link in with the other students in the cohort and actually get to learn from each other, consolidate knowledge each week. And it is it's your contact with other people based on the fact that it is an online course. So having that contact with your peers is actually really helpful. Different supervision stuff that John's already kind of covered. So it is helpful because you get the group supervision and individual. So you get different styles as well with different supervisors. I'm on, like for this year, I'm on to my now, I've had 2 supervisors in the first semester and another 2 now in this semester, which is quite helpful to get a kind of different variety of experiences and different kind of modalities that they're used to working with. I have also, I know a lot of questions will be around being able to work in your own workplace. That's something that I've felt quite privileged to be able to do. And I have been able to do that for both my placements. The caveat to that though, is that it's not within my role. So it's been within the same workplace, but I'm quite fortunate to work in a public mental health system. And within that, they actually have quite a variety of different teams that you can work in. So if you are quite lucky enough to work in public mental health, that will probably be really helpful. There's been some kind of feedback from other clinicians that are working in private practices where there might be difficulties in the placement side of things, collecting hours and how they might problem solve that, which they do. But definitely I've found it quite helpful in the public mental health. The other stuff is around, so I found coming back to the course it did reignite a number of kind of core skills that you might have over time in your experience maybe diluted. So I've had 10 years of experience working as a psychologist in a lot of different teams, but a lot of them have been within still tertiary services, but working as a case manager. So coming back to those core psychological skills was really helpful for me. We do, as a student body, have a kind of central communication platform using WhatsApp. And that's just a helpful kind of tool for us just as students to get together to kind of work out what's planned, what assessments are coming up, kind of feeding each other bits of information that might be helpful for our assessments. On the right-hand side, things that I kind of highlighted to think about that was helpful for me is coming back into this course, knowing that you're someone who has had experience, having a think about what your goal actually might be and what you want to get out of the course. For me, it was really trying to kind of come back to my core skills that I might have diluted. The other component is around the time management side of things. So knowing a lot of you will be doing full-time, part-time work. I was doing 4 days a week last year and I was on full-time this year. So working out how to kind of balance between the work life and student life. For me, I found that, so last year with the coursework, I was doing the 5th day of work full study. So I was probably spending 8 hours a week doing coursework, whilst I was doing the other 4 days in my employment. This year, I've separated between 3 days a week in placement and 2 days a week in my employment. And I've been able to negotiate that with my team leader around how that is managed to make sure that I do value add to my coursework. Yeah, I guess the cliche thing that everyone always says during uni is making sure you give yourself some buffer room and start assessments early, which we all say and none of us will ever do. However, self-paced learning for some people, like, it is, I guess, a lot harder, where it's up to you and that self-initiation to actually make goals, to submit drafts or submit assignments. So I would be planning things in advance. Little, I guess, hidden things to keep in mind. So for first year, don't just rely on the lecture slides. There is a lot of valuable information that lecturers say in their video recording, so not just relying on the paper printouts. There'll be things that you'll miss that you'll need for the exams and assignments. And being quite patient with yourself, transitioning from full-time work back into student life. I hadn't been a student for 10 years and that was a hectic change. Second year wise, I just said around, I guess, for placement, yeah, I've had great opportunities within public mental health, but needed to be definitely very well planned around when are my assignments due, when are my placement hours due, am I going to keep up with my hours? No one's going to look after that for you. So being able to keep a log around how many hours you need and how you're going to kind of keep up with what's required is going to be really important. But at the end of the day, we're all adults and I'm pretty sure we can all do that. The other thing I didn't write on there, second year with research project, is something that I probably didn't think too much about when I was choosing placements. The research project in second year is based on a case that you'd be working with primarily in your first semester. So bearing in mind, if you're wanting to have like a case of interest, keeping in mind that your placement needs to probably reflect that. So I've ended up doing a research project in borderline personality, which wasn't necessarily an interest of mine before this year, but has had to become one. I probably would have preferred what I'm doing in my second semester, but didn't pre-plan that one. So thinking about your placements and what your case project might want to be about and how you might plan to kind of make that pan out for yourself would be helpful. I don't know if there's questions at this point, if that happens at the end. That's my lots of verbal venting that I'm done.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. I think it's that's one of the really valuable things about the session today, is just to hear exactly from your experience what it's been like, and then to get some of those insights. Again, for anyone here who does have questions, feel free to continue popping them into the feed. There is a Q&A chat, which you can share any questions that you might have. Again, we'll have a chance to open it up at the very end of the session as well, but you can continue throughout the session to put any questions through and we'll moderate them as they come. For now, I did just want to quickly refer to the tuition fees and funding options that students can consider for this course. So the tuition fees for all of our programs are available on the website, and they have just been updated for 2025 as well. So you'll be able to see the individual course fees there. There are a number of different ways that you can pay. So for students who are eligible and domestic, you can allocate your tuition fees to your fee help loan account. And there are a few other external either scholarships, subsidies, or loans that you can also access, whether through the government or through other organizations. So you might want to do some research on that, as we've suggested. As well, there are students who can just make upfront and direct payments. And so whether or not you would choose to do that, we can also offer a number of different payment plans and payment options for students who do choose to make upfront and direct payments. In addition to the general support that's available the academic support that's available for post-registration through John and his academic team, we do also have a number of different student supports for other aspects of being a student. So for anyone here today who's an international student, we do offer tailored events, workshops, as well as individual advice around international students, just to acknowledge that they obviously do have different experiences and to support with that transition. There are also a number of different academic resources that we have, whether that's through the library, one-on-one learning advice, as well as other workshops and webinars that are run throughout the academic year. And then lastly, for any students who do have ongoing or temporary accessibility needs, or who experience personal or special circumstances throughout their studies, we do have a number of different learning equity accommodations as well. So providing some flexible modifications to support you in your studies is also something that is available. So we're going to try and really jump into the questions from this point on, and I'll kind of pass them to John and Danny where appropriate. To start off with, Danielle, can you give us a bit more experience, a bit more insight into your experience doing placement, working in either private or public organizations?
Yeah, obviously I'm only going to be able to do public. All of them have been public. So I am probably a bit of a nuance where I actually was in Melbourne last year to do coursework for the first year. And I did actually relocate back to Queensland where I was from so I could get a paid placement. So I went back to Gold Coast so I could work for the service that I used to work for that was willing to re-employ me. And so I'm working in young adult service at the moment and have been all year, but there's under that one banner, there's about 6 different sub-teams. So my semester 1, I worked in early psychosis and Project AIR, so around borderline personality, and the case management team for young adults, so working with 18 to 21-year-olds with different diagnoses. All 3 of them were not the role that I'm employed and paid under, but 3 roles that my team leader was willing to be flexible with, that I would do 2 days in my paid role and 3 days still paid, but within those 3 teams. And in my second semester, which I'm in now, I'm working in the young adult eating disorder service and the Headspace in Reach team. So I found it helpful, I guess, because I had those past relationships that kind of, if you can build relationships within your workplace, they can help that flexibility around allowing that to kind of work in line with what your coursework needs and particularly getting new experiences. So all of this year have been new experiences for me, with my past experience being in usually child and youth mental health. So young adult was already going to be a new experience because there is that you need to prove that you are going to learn something new that you haven't done before. So working in your current workplace, I would say will probably be difficult if you can't prove the difference of skills you might acquire that you wouldn't have had otherwise. But that's been my experience.
Thank you, John. Yeah, absolutely. John, I might ask you to share some insight around what that might contrast to in terms of working in private practice for placement opportunities.
Yeah, I'll do that, Megan. I'll try and pick up some of the other questions that are in the chat as I go. So it is a common question for people to want to work in their to do a placement where they work. Of course, mate, it's of massive practical advantage to people. So as Danielle said, the sort of threshold for it really is, can you structure a placement where you work that provides you with a new set of skills or new opportunities to learn under supervision? We provide the supervision, but for example, if you work in a child, a pediatric psychology practice, then if you come to us with a placement proposal, it needs to include something new experience, stuff that you don't just do day to day, and you've been able to demonstrate that it is new as well. And so we look at your websites, we meet with you to talk to you about the work that you do and try and establish with you what it is about the placement that you're proposing that would be different. And most people do manage to achieve that. It takes a bit of work, but generally speaking, even in private practice, as Danielle said, it can be much easier in public health because, if you work in a large public health setting, they can just say, okay, Danielle, well, you go over here and do 6 months over here, and then you go over here and do 6 months over here, which is effectively what Danielle's done. And both of those placements are in the same health authority that she works in, but with different clients in different buildings with different people. So that is often more straightforward. But perfectly possible in private practice, just requires you to think about how you can demonstrate that you're doing something new. There was a question about payment as well. Payment is possible, but it's not something we get into. So you're all registered psychologists. Many of you will be able to negotiate paid placements, and many people do, but we stay out of that side of things.
I was just going to add an example.
Sorry, go ahead, Danielle.
I was going to add an example around what's different. So if my experience has been in child and youth, and I know, so my placement this semester is within Headspace, still within child and youth, which does then mean it's a similar cohort that I've worked with, but the diagnoses are different. They're a different part of the step system of care, so more around that mild to moderate, but it's also that interventions that I'm providing are more brief interventions, group work, things that I haven't done prior, where I used to do more evidence-based long-term interventions. So you probably do get into like the nitty-gritty around what treatments will you be providing that you haven't done before, what assessments will you be doing that you might not have done before, different diagnoses you're working with. There's lots of options.
John, I might ask you to, there have been a few questions around the 3 admissions questions that you discussed earlier. Can you just elaborate a bit more on that in terms of what you're expecting and what candidates can try, or any advice, sorry.
Yeah, so the questions are in the application. So when you commence the application, you will find the 3 questions. So they're not separate on the website. Once you commence the application process, you will see the questions within the application form, and we're asking for, it would be very, I don't think we ask for a specific number of words, but people tend to write a paragraph for each one, right? So somewhere between 5 and 10 lines for each question seems to be the norm. So don't overthink it, don't overdo it. The questions are pretty straightforward. When you see them, if you just answer them in the way that makes sense to you, you will find yourself writing about a paragraph, and that's all we're looking for.
Thanks. And Danielle, I know you're busy replying to a question in the chat at the moment, but
How do you know that?
Says Danielle Waddell is typing an answer. I can see it.
I might ask you a bit of a consolidated question. So there have been a few queries around just like generally, what does a day, or not a day, rather a week in the life of a post-grad student look like, including both placements as well as coursework units? Can you just, again, I know John talked about the course structure a little bit earlier, but can you give us just a bit of a snapshot from your perspective as a current student, what that week kind of typically looks like for you?
Different between last year to this year. So last year it was a matter of attending a lecture, attending a tutorial, doing my own self-paced kind of work on my assignments, and prepping. So I prep my study for my exams from week 1, and doing the readings each week. The readings can get overwhelming if you don't keep up. There's a lot of readings. That's nothing different from your bachelor. So yeah, it involves tutorial, lecture to watch, readings, plus your work and additional study to get your assignments completed, which is where I guess I consolidated a lot of mine into one day at the end of my week and worked Monday to Thursday, and did study on a Friday. And then I was doing obviously a study on weekends as well when assignments were getting due.
Thanks. And then we did just have a follow-up question from someone anonymous. In terms of days where, or phases where you are on placement, how much of that time is spent with face-to-face with clients?
So I asked for no more than, well, for me, I'm doing no more than 3 face-to-faces per day of placement. I opted for both my placements to do 3 days a week to keep my placement duration shorter. So I think it's only over 12 or 15 weeks if I'm doing 3 days a week. Don't quote my math. But if you do 2 days a week, of which is also an option, obviously it just extends how long your placement will take. But for me to get the direct client hours that I need, having 3 clients per day gets my direct client hours by the end of placement. Whereas if you have less, you might need to take more weeks to get it out. But then there is, I think, a limit. I'm not sure. I think it's 4 per day where you're not actually allowed to go over 4 per day for uni itself. So you might be able to do that in your private practice or workplace, but for uni, that is not a possibility. It has to keep to 4.
And that can often be one of the tensions that you need to negotiate when you're doing a private practice placement rather than public health or NGO placement, in that your private practice might be they're almost always willing to pay you, right? Because you're making money for them whilst you're working. So it's a good way to sort of live and survive and keep working while you're doing the course. But when you're on placement, you can't see 7-8 hours of clients a day, and log all that in your logbook. We have fairly strict requirements about how much of that you do, so that it leaves room within 7.5-hour day to have supervision, to do reading, to prepare, to do your formulations and your treatment plans and so forth. And that can require some negotiation sometimes with practice managers and so on.
Which I know I'm very heavy on public mental health. Clearly, that's been my life. However, most of the students that I've been engaging with that are doing private practice have been able to do that too. So both sides have worked for like all the students and being able to problem solve different barriers that come up.
Danielle, can I ask for you to speak to both Nikki and these questions in the chat at the moment?
And Kirsty, you said, where did they go?
No, sorry, Nikki and Heidi.
Are students often working part-time while completing? But yes, yeah, I don't know anyone that hasn't been working. But I also do know that from what John had mentioned, we have had people that have been pregnant, have gone for promotions, have cut in and out because of different kind of things going on for them. So all the nuances that have occurred in my cohort as well. And yeah, so for me, like now currently I'm doing 2 days a week of my own employment and then 3 days a week of placement. And yeah, majority are all part-time working as well. Can you split the day for practice hours or placement hours? I wouldn't recommend that. I'm not sure if there's a requirement, but I guess or even just to pass kind of your placement meetings, to keep it quite clean around what days you're doing placement and what days you're not. I wouldn't be doing both in one day. That will get way too complicated and things will get really blurry.
Yeah, and when you do a placement proposal, the placement coordinators are pretty hot on that. They want to know what days are your placement days and what days aren't your placement days. You can only log placement hours on your agreed placement days. And then when you start working with your supervisor, the supervisor is going to want to be really clear with you about which are your placement clients, so that there is minimal bleed between the two kind of parts of your life if you're doing placement where you work.
And that's also to protect you, because I think like for me, if I didn't have that, then I would be inundated every single day and it wouldn't even just be for placement. I would be absolutely just overwhelmed. So keeping it quite clean, just have a boundary would be really helpful. And John's typing that answer.
Yeah, I know. Thanks,
yeah, I can talk quicker than I type those. So let me delete that and talk to it. It's not very easy. It's not very easy to answer. The timetable is set at the beginning of the year for the whole year, so you will know in advance when your tutorials are for the whole year before it commences. And depending on how many students we enroll, so there is quite a lot of flexibility around it these days. Depending on how many students we enroll, we'll have either 3 or 4 streams for every unit. So let's say we're talking about the adult psychopathology unit, there would be 3 to 4 streams for that, and you can just go to any one of them, and they'll be on a range of times, on a range of days. And you can self-select which one you go to. So there is a fair bit of flexibility. What tends to happen, of course, is that every now and then, there's always one that's on a Friday and everyone piles into the Friday one. So if you want a quieter one, then you go to one of the ones on Tuesday or something. But if you don't mind, and Friday's your day, then you can go to a Friday one, and there'll just be more people in it. But it's up to you.
Yeah, we had 3 options per week. In our first shift, with our 85 cohort, we had 3 different tutorials to choose from. I wouldn't recommend a Monday or a Friday because they're usually public holiday days. So choose a midweek.
Fridays especially. Mondays especially. Yeah, Fridays there's a few less, but we do have 3 or 4 in semester 1. Monday public holidays. But as Danielle says, there's free choice. We used to try and allocate people to streams, and we just gave up in the end, so people can self-select and go to whichever ones they want.
I can't answer those ones.
Ming is on.
So John, I might ask you to speak to the number of places as well as how the exams for the shortlist is configured.
Can we choose the exam date? Well, no, we will probably give you an exam date. If something exceptional happens, then we might be able to move you to another one. But what effectively is happening at the moment is we receive the applications, we process them as they come in, and then we sort of get back to everybody all at once. In that slice. So we've just sort of allocated a load of people to a early October exam. The next one will be an early November exam. Then there'll be one at the end of November. So we will tell you which exam to do, and we will give you plenty of notice around that.
John, can you provide a bit more information about the requirements of the thesis components?
So the thesis is 6,000 words split across two units, one in semester 1 of the second year, one in semester 2 of the second year, and they interact, but they're effectively one of the ways of thinking about, well, how big is the thesis is in combination is the equivalent of one coursework unit. So the coursework units you do in the first year are 12.5 credit point units, all 4 of them. In the second year, you do an 18.5 credit point unit placement and a 6.25 credit point unit thesis. So the thesis is a half unit and the placement is a 1.5 unit. So there is really only one assignment per semester for it. There is actually 2, but one's a very small one, sort of 10% weighted. And in the first semester, you submit a proposal of what you're going to do. It has to be a sort of in a novel area that's going to provide something that would be of interest to the profession. So we don't need any more case reports about CBT for needle phobia, for example. Something that is going to be fairly novel, of interest to the profession. You do a brief 250-word proposal, and then the big assignment for that semester is you write the literature review, half of it, 3,000 words. And in the second semester, you do some corrections, a small amount of corrections to your literature review, and then that's a sort of 20% weighted, very straightforward assignment. Nobody gets more than 5 corrections. And then the main assignment being you write the case report. And then at the end of that whole thing, you put both of them together as one document and submit the whole thing as a 6,000-word integrated literature review and case study.
Thanks for this question. Danny, I might actually ask you to do a bit of recollection back when you were first applying for the postgrad program. Do you have any particular kind of comments or just key recollections of what you did to actually prepare for not only the application itself, but then the shortlist stages that you did when you were first applying?
Because I think you had to do an actual interview, didn't you, Danielle?
So mine was a little bit different. So we didn't do the video. We got interviewed, which was fabulous. But John was on the panel, which was not terrifying at all. But my prep, I didn't actually know what to prep for. So I think for me, I just re-looked at my bachelor notes and thinking, what's the core kind of components of psychology? But I actually can't remember the questions, but I'm pretty sure anything that I prepped for was not what I was asked. So
I can tell people what the video question is. It's not a secret. The video question that's replaced the interview is asking people to reflect on the time they were given critical feedback and how they responded. And that can be from anybody, right? It could be a client, it could be a boss, it could be a colleague. It doesn't really matter. But what we're interested in is you providing an example of the critical feedback, reflecting on how it impacted you, and demonstrating how you adjusted your practice as a result. It's only 5 minutes, so as you know, we're not asking for war and peace. Yeah, and as Danielle said, we're not trying to catch anyone out with the application form.
No.
I can't remember whether the questions we asked you, Danielle, were the same at the.
I remember one question was around how would I manage going back into coursework
Yeah, that's
after
still
having
there.
worked.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
We're interested in how people will cope with how they think they're going to cope with postgraduate study, work-life balance, mixing part-time study with all the other things you've got to do.
I know another question, because I think I struggle with the answer. I don't know if I got it, so hey, was around what the difference was going to be between being a clinical psych and being a general registered psych. And I guess without having been a clinical psych, that was particularly challenging to try and answer. But that was another one.
Thanks, Rose. I know there's been a lot of information shared already, and we do still have a few more moments for questions if you do have any final burning things that you would like to ask. In the meantime, I just might pose a question to both John and Danielle, just in terms of what for you each individually, what do you really enjoy just about being at Cairnmillar, whether that's as a student or just as a community member? What do you kind of sets it apart, I suppose?
For me, I think it's been the fact that I've been able to make it my own. So it hasn't felt like a university that I have to do exactly what kind of they're telling me and in their fashion, in their structure. I've actually been able to mold it within my life, my work, my study. So it's kind of that self-paced side of things. It's been as self kind of guided with the appropriate facilitation to get through it. So I'm getting the same outcome as a fully fledged course, but in a way that has made sense for me.
And I would think for me, the most enjoyable part of it is probably for me I do a bit of everything. I do some research, I do some supervision, I do some teaching, and sort of look after the course overall. If I had to pick one bit, I think it's probably the teaching. I do enjoy the supervision, but it's hard. Whereas the teaching, I think I just find an enjoyable experience. It's really enjoyable engaging with the students and sort of trying to make material accessible to people. So yeah, for me, I think it's the online teaching has been a nice surprise for me.
A few final questions coming through. Both Danny and John, you've been asked to be a clinical place.
I can say quite quickly there is opportunity to go to the campus in person around like the library and whatnot too. I never did, and now I clearly won't because I'm in a different state. But that possibility is there, but not your coursework won't be there. And then the transition from generally registered studying to be clinically registered, I guess for me, I've just felt more like I'm actually working as a psychologist now. My conceptualization of cases has significantly improved, and that's been pretty much a goal of mine in semester 2 this year. It hasn't changed my passions or anything like that. It's just, I guess, made me really feel more like a psychologist than I had done. I don't know how to answer Heidi's question. I'm guessing mine's a no. Based on not having the qualification by that point.
I supervise, yeah, I tend to supervise 2 or 3 in the first semester and 1 or 2 in the second semester.
So John, there is a question just about the difference between the Master of Clinical Psych as well as the post-reg program. So the kind of differences between
those. Got to sort of separate the two components, the master's component and the kind of content component. So a master's is a master's is a master's, can be in anything, right? So that part of it is just a level of qualification that's set by the Australian tertiary, it's set by the AQF, Australian qualification framework. So for it something to be a master's, it has to have certain components. So we have those components. And it's about sort of a level of advanced teaching, really. The difference between programs in terms of the other standalone level 4, APAC level 4 bridging programs, the main differences are most have a face-to-face component or a heavily face-to-face. Some have different structures to their theses. 1 or 2 aren't masters, they're graduate diplomas and don't have a thesis at all. And 1 or 2 are very conventional masters where you're doing very empirical work. So the one at Curtin, for example, it's a very conventional empirical thesis that you do. And we're somewhere in the middle. So the level of qualification is the same, but there's just different emphases between different courses, really. The main one being online versus not online.
I think there's also a good balance with the assumption that, because with this course, obviously, there's a presumption that you have some kind of experience or a general registration, therefore you've got kind of that clinical background. But I also know coming into the course, there needs to be an appreciation also that you are coming back to being a student. So we don't know everything. And when we have got experience, there is sometimes that narrative around that I know more than kind of what I'm being treated like as well. So being appreciative of that, as much as we've got experience when we go back to uni, we're actually there to kind of learn more things as well. And we might be rehashing stuff we've done before, but it's kind of that perspective that you are shifting from being someone who's got experience to I am now actually a student as well. That can be challenging, I think, for different people. And I've noticed that in our cohort as well.
Thanks, folks. So as we give it a couple more moments for any final questions, I did just want to reiterate a few final takeaways. So as we've discussed, applications are obviously now open, and then we are already processing for the first round of shortlisting, as John mentioned. They will be assessed ongoing and as they are submitted. So we really do encourage anyone who is considering application to really get their documents in early to maximize the chance that you receive full considerations, given that late applications are less likely to be successful and that offers are being made on an early and ongoing basis. If you do have any questions, you can double check on our website for guidance around how to apply, as well as more details around the course. And if you would like an opportunity for further consultation, you can also book an individual admissions consultation with someone from our applications team to ask a few more questions about your specific circumstances or to get support around your individual application. As John mentioned, there is a shortlist competency exam as well as a video submission with no live interviews being conducted anymore. But we are still making, as I mentioned, those first, second and ongoing offers. So again, we really do hope that you get your application in if you're considering, and we'd be happy to have a chat with you if you do want to have further consultation afterwards. We're still here for another couple of moments. So like I said, if you do have any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. But if not, I do want to thank both John and Danielle again for their time and their insight. We're really excited that there's been so much interest in this course and continues to be so much interest. So we hope to see your application come through in the coming weeks or months. And again, if you have questions, you can always email us. Otherwise, book for a consultation on our website. But we'll hang around for another few moments if anything else comes through. But thank you again, everyone, for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I think we'll wrap it up. So again, thanks one last time. If you do have any questions, feel free to send us an email. We'll also be sharing a recording of this session to anyone who attended today. So keep an eye out for that if you would like to review it again. But otherwise, again, best of luck. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And thanks to John and Danielle once again.